everyone, I'm Pamela. Thanks for joining me for this tutorial on how to do a downward facing dog correctly. So sometimes it's a little bit of just finding some fine tuning to get your downward dog a little bit stronger, a little bit more in proper alignment. Always listen to your body and listen to your breath and find variations as you need to. So we'll be going over a few things today that should help your downward dog come into a little bit more alignment, maybe a little bit more sense of grounding or finding length or ease in your pose. So to begin, come onto your mat. You might have a couple blocks handy. Come onto your hands and knees in table pose. So this is usually how we start to come into a downward dog. You might start with your wrists just slightly in front of your shoulders, and pointer fingers or middle finger should be pointing towards the front of your mat, wrists about shoulder distance apart, maybe slightly wider but not much, knees just about under your hips, and draw your belly in slightly. Invite your spine to lengthen. And notice your elbows. If you were to bend your arms, notice where your elbows go. You want them to go back towards the back of your mat, not out towards the sides of your mat. If your elbows are going out to the side, this puts a lot of strain into your shoulders, and it causes a lot of tension into the upper back and shoulders. So we want external rotation in the upper arms. So if you bend the elbows, they should be pointing towards the back of your mat. That's a little test you can do. The lower arms are internally rotated compared to the upper arms, but we don't want to turn the hands in. It's just a very slight internal rotation. So the pointer fingers or the middle finger should be pointing towards the front of your mat. Spread your fingers wide and press down into the knuckles of your hands and fingers. Tuck your toes and reach your hips up and back for your downward dog. Feet might be about hip distance apart. You might bend your knees a little bit and think of taking your hips up and back as you lengthen through your spine. Create space around your neck and upper trapezius. And you can either let your head hang or keep your ears in between your upper arms. Press into your hands like you're pushing into the earth to lift your hips up and back as you take your heels towards the earth. And then lower your knees. You might rotate your wrists. Just notice how that felt. So sometimes what I see is rounding in the spine. And if you can think of taking your heart in the direction of your toes and engaging the upper back and shoulder girdle, you'll find a little more length in the spine. And one way we can sort of explore that is through melting heart pose or puppy pose. So the upper body is very similar to downward dog. You might want a block for your head. Keep your hips just about in line with your knees. Reach your hands out further towards the front of your mat. Engage your core and imagine you're taking your heart towards the mat. You can adjust the block as you need to, or your forehead might make it to the mat. Keep your arms as straight as is comfortable. Pressing into your hands, lengthening through your spine, draw your belly in. And notice how that feels in your upper back and shoulders. That's sometimes where we find tightness is in our upper back and shoulders. And if there's too much tension there, too much tightness, you're not going to be able to find that ease in downward dog. So a couple things you can do are stretching into the upper back and shoulders. I do have a myofascial release video on the upper back and shoulders, and that's great to do before you do a downward dog to release some of that tension and tightness. But right now we're just going to do a stretch for the upper back and shoulders. So notice how it felt in your puppy, and then bring your blocks, maybe at the low setting, just about shoulder distance apart. Bring your elbows onto those blocks, hands in a prayer position, and take your hips back as you bring your forehead to the mat. Now, if your forehead doesn't quite make it to the mat, you can either place a towel or blanket in between the blocks to rest your forehead on, or you might just place your elbows on the mat instead of blocks. So hands in a prayer position, engage your core, take your hips slightly back, forehead to the mat, lengthen through your spine, and breathe here. Keep your belly drawn in towards the spine, and make sure this feels okay in your shoulders. Hands may or may not make it all the way to the upper back. That's okay. And again, make sure your hips are either in line with your knees or towards your feet, not in front of the knees. Take a few more breaths here. And then slowly and thoughtfully make your way out of that pose. Set your blocks aside. From table with your wrists slightly in front of your shoulders, tuck your toes once more, lift your hips up and back. Adho Mukha Svanasana, downward facing dog. Think of lifting your sits bones up to the sky. You can bend your knees a little bit. And take your heart in the direction of your toes. So it should feel similar in the upper back and shoulders to puppy. And you might feel a little more openness now from that stretch. And then you can walk your feet towards your hands, come up halfway, lengthening through your spine, and come into Uttanasana, forward fold. So again, long spine, a slight engagement in the upper back and shoulder girdle, and draw your belly button towards the spine. Press into the balls of your feet, taking your belly towards your thighs. Knees can be bent a little or a lot. Weight into the balls of the feet. And when you're ready, come up slowly halfway. And then again, you might lower down onto one knee and then the other, and just pause for a moment. So one thing I see a lot in downward dog is that rounding of the spine. So by stretching the upper back and shoulders, you can find a little more openness and ease there to feel like you're lifting your heart in a Tadasana, in puppy pose, finding that same engagement in the upper back and shoulder girdle. Sometimes the hamstrings are really tight, and that's causing a little bit of rounding or flexion around the low back area. So doing the Uttanasana forward fold, getting your hamstrings stretched out, is one way to do that. Or from a seated forward fold with your legs out in front of you. Similar position here. Hinging from your hips. Keeping the spine long, like your heart is leading. You may not go very far. If your hamstrings are real tight, you can bend the knees and be here. So again, have that sense of action and engagement in the shoulders and upper back. And notice how that feels. And then eventually you can keep the legs straight and hinge forward. From the hips, avoid rounding the spine. Think of drawing your heart towards your toes, keeping length in your spine. Hands where they make sense to you. To deepen this position, think of taking a deeper hinge from the hips, like you're trying to get your belly more towards the thighs. And you can always hold this pose longer. It's great to hold it like 3 minutes or more to really get into that stretch of the hamstrings to increase your flexibility. So just after doing the forward fold and the seated forward fold, let's come back to downward dog and see how it feels now. Again, start in table, wrists slightly in front of your shoulders. Engage your core, feel that lengthen your spine, engaging your upper back and shoulder girdle. Tuck your toes, reach your hips up and back. Press into your hands, taking your hips up and back as you take your heels towards the earth. Notice if there's a little more ease in your downward dog now. Notice your breath. Again, you can bend the knees a little as you need to. And when you're ready, lower down onto your mat and pause. Notice how you feel. So I hope you enjoyed that little tutorial on coming into a downward facing dog with a little bit more of a proper alignment into the spine and upper back and shoulders, as well as the hands and arms. I'll be doing more tutorial yoga videos in the future. So if you like this video, please like and subscribe, and I look forward to seeing you next time. Have a beautiful day. Thank you, everyone.